Welcome to the Now What podcast, a podcast focused on young adults, epilepsy, and the problems they face. I'm Karan.
And I'm Sophie, and we are advisors to the Cameron Boyce Foundation. If you don't already know, TCBF honors the legacy of our best friend Cameron by aiming to cure epilepsy through funding research, education, and awareness campaigns, while still supporting causes that were important to Cameron.
We're incredibly excited about the conversations we'll have each week, and it wouldn't be possible without our amazing sponsor, UCB. Each week, we're going to discuss an important topic related to epilepsy and young adults. And this week, we're covering what to do when you have a large life transition, such as going to college or getting your first job.
So with that being said, before we bring in our two amazing guests for the week, we want to give you a little introduction on them both. First, we have Dr. Kim Pargeon, who is on our board and an attending epileptologist who completed her epilepsy clinical neurophysiology training at Columbia in New York City. From there, she's been an attending physician at Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx, Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, and Weill Cornell Medical Center in New York City. She is presently an attending at Harbor UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles County, and we are very lucky to have her.
And we also have Monique Hopgood-Willis, an epilepsy advocate and a neuroscience student that sits on our young adult community advisory board. She's dealt with a lot of these experiences firsthand, so we're really excited to speak with her. We hope you guys enjoy the episode. Dr. Pargeon, Monique, thank you so much for being here at the Now What podcast. We've been talking about this for quite some time behind the scenes, and I'm so glad it's finally here. And more importantly, I'm so glad that you both are here for this episode.
Yeah, we're excited to get both of your different kind of viewpoints on things. So thanks.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Dr. Pargeon, we kind of want to start a little bit with you because we know that there's a lot of major life changes that people go through over the course of their life, and having epilepsy can add a different complication and a totally different experience to things like getting a job, moving out, going to college, all of that. So we kind of wanted to hear from you about how you've dealt with patients that have navigated that, what you would advise, and sort of just what it looks like to go through those changes as someone with epilepsy.
Of course. So I would say probably the biggest transitions for most people is going from high school to college and getting their first job. Especially going to college can be a really unique challenge. A lot of patients don't want to seem different, don't want to seem sick. So it's hard for them to want to share that with other people around them. But I think a lot of times education is a really key thing, since seizures do still carry a lot of stigma and they do scare people a lot. But I think information can be very powerful. So one of the things that I notice with people transitioning to college is like, how do I get my medications? How do I do that? My mom or dad have always picked up my meds for me. They always worry about whether I have refills or not. So that is one area where you don't want to make sure they don't miss a step. I usually suggest people go to a national pharmacy to have their medication sent. So that way mom and dad can still access it, but so can the patient, and start learning to kind of take care of those things themselves. The other thing I think is good is to talk to the pharmacist specifically, and maybe make sure that you have auto refills set up so you don't get down to your last pill and go, oh crap, I don't have any pills left. And the pharmacy says, yeah, we don't have any of this, especially if you're in a small area. You don't have 20 pharmacies to go look at. It would be really helpful to make sure you don't get down to that last pill and then miss doses because you didn't get your meds refilled. And then I think the other thing is to make sure the pharmacist has a correct contact information for your doctor. We find a lot of times the pharmacies do not have correct contact information. So if they're requesting refills from your doctor, they send it to something in the ether and it never actually makes it to your doctor. And so you never get the refill unless you can get a hold of the doctor and take care of that yourself. But sometimes it's nice that the pharmacist can do it for you. So those are kind of some things to start with, but there are actually quite a few things I usually tell people as they're transitioning.
That's great. I guess I don't know because I've never lived in dorms on campus or anything, but would you ever recommend looking into like a delivery service for prescriptions? I know that's changed my life for getting my prescriptions on time. And I know a lot of pharmacies have done that, and maybe that is like of help for people.
Yeah, I think that does help a lot of people because they don't have to take that time out. You know, you're in the middle of either, like I said, your first job, or you're just going off to college. They still will deliver even to a dorm area. And a lot of dorm areas have like a front desk where it actually would be secure rather than just leaving it somewhere. So that actually could be a good option if you're in the dorm.
Yeah, that's great advice to think about the sort of informing your pharmacist and stuff, because I think the transition of any medication for pharmacies is always a lot of work and kind of going through that.
And it also feels so like laborious in my head. I know the thought of having to track down a medication at a pharmacy is something that probably sticks around on my to-do list a little bit too long. Monique, I'm curious, is that something that you relate to as like, you've navigated your own journey with epilepsy and those challenges? Was it a conversation with your parents where it's like, okay, it's now your job to take care of your own medication, or we want you to be more of a participant in your care that way? Or was that something that was like always a part of your like growing up, of like you were always kind of aware of, mom, dad, it's time for me to get a refill? What was your journey with that?
So mine really started later in life. So I'm actually older than I look. And so really going, I'm from Michigan. I live in Atlanta now. My parents always got our medication, but then when I moved to Atlanta, I was already an adult. So it was kind of like my mom, before I moved to Atlanta, gave me my medical records and was like, here's your medical records, goodbye. Kind of went off into the world. And then I have an amazing husband, and my mother-in-law is a nurse. So I think that helped a lot as well, having a healthcare team in the family to kind of help with that. But I kind of really navigated this epilepsy journey as an adult. So I kind of had to figure it out on the fly, on the way. I didn't have this journey as a child, because, and even if I did, like I did, but my parents took care of everything. I was kind of in the dark for everything until I became an adult. I was like, oh snap, oh, I gotta get my medicine. It's time for me to take my neurologist appointment. It's time for me to,
Yeah.
take control. So I guess I had to do everything kind of fast and at once. And once I moved to Atlanta, it was like, and you live in a big city too, you kind of have to do everything on the fly.
That's kind of what Dr. Pargeon's talking about, of like it can feel really abrupt when you hit that point where it's like, okay, now you're on your own and here's all of your medical info and good luck. Because it's one of those things that as people, we like to kind of try to bury our head in the sand about even our own like health records and stuff, because insurance and everything's, it's all a nightmare. It's one of the things about adulting that no one likes to do. So I think that's all great advice on that transition. Do you have anything else, Dr. Pargeon, that you kind of want to speak to about?
So, I mean, she brings up some really good points. One of them, like we were talking about before, I think is plan ahead. You really want to think about, where am I going to be in the next X number of months? Do I want to get a new doctor in the area that I'm moving to? So some college students or some young adults will go to some other area, like you moved to Atlanta, which has an amazing group of epileptologists. I know quite a few of them there. But you may have had a really good relationship with your epileptologist. Oh, cat making appearance.
Yeah.
That would be my dogs if heard. But if you had a great relationship with your epileptologist before, you may actually want to make arrangements ahead of time to see that person during your holiday breaks if you're in college. Unfortunately, the way healthcare goes these days, you really need to make sure you make an appointment ahead of time, because you call the week prior, you're not going to get an appointment. So if you only have like a week at Thanksgiving or 2 weeks at, the Christmas holidays, you want to make sure you get in to see your doctor then. And they often are on vacation during some of those time periods. So I ended up squeezing a lot of college students in, when they had those breaks. So I think figuring out, either doctor in your area or staying with your doctor and how am I going to see this person is very important. And then also insurance. You brought up a good point there. You're on your parents' insurance while you're in college in a lot of cases. And then that changes when you go to your first job. And so making sure that you understand with HR, what are my choices? Do I have to go see a primary care doctor, then get assigned a neurologist who may not actually be at a level 4 epilepsy center? And do I have to see that person then before I actually go see a person who actually specializes in this? Or can I just go to someone who actually knows what they're, knows what I'm going through and how to deal with my medical condition? So I think those are other things to think about. Insurance can be a little painful.
When you get a new patient, or maybe a patient that's kind of transferring over to your care, what's the kind of rule of thumb that you're like, here's some basic information that I need that helps me best understand like your medical landscape, or like, this is the stuff that I'd love to know, because nothing's worse, I'm sure, than I've done that too many times where I've been at the doctor's office where I'm like, one second, let me try to find the medication that I use, or it sounds something like this.
So a lot of people are like, oh, I take the blue one or the white one, and I'm like, I have no idea what the blue one or the white one is. So it's always good to have a good list of your medications that you're taking right now, but also what you've taken before, especially for epilepsy. I wish we had a way to scan a genetic barcode and say, oh, this is the perfect medicine for you. You will have these side effects, but not these side effects, but we're not at that point. We do, or at least in my practice, I do think about other characteristics like age, gender, other medicines or other medical conditions when I'm picking an anti-seizure drug. And we have over 20 drugs at this point. So it can feel a little bit like trial and error to patients. So it's always good to know, what have you tried in the past? And also, if you have a device implanted, especially RNS, responsive neurostimulator, you have to also plan that too. If you're transitioning to a new doctor, make sure that doctor knows how to do RNS, because not everybody does. And they have to actually transition your information from the site that you were at before to a new site so the new doctor can see it. So it's important to be in touch with NeuroPace and taking care of things like that. But I think there's, I had a patient, for instance, who just moved to Hawaii, and I had to call I got a hold of the NeuroPace folks, and I found doctors in Hawaii that actually are on their registry and take patients with RNS to make sure she was taken care of.
That's awesome.
So it's just, but some of these things you don't think about. You're like, well, I just go to my doctor. They do all these things, and I don't have to worry about any of it. But sometimes you have to think about those things ahead of time.
Yeah. I'm curious as far as and I know a lot of colleges have health centers and health services at their centers. And while it's not necessarily an epileptologist in-house always, is there anything that you would recommend for if there's resources at these colleges that are typically set up to assist people, whether it's medication or just even developing a relationship with a doctor that's close by at least?
That's a great question. Some health centers have been easier to deal with than others, but I would say it's a good resource for most students because they're on campus. Usually it's in an easily accessible area. So I think it's fine to go see somebody there, but you're not going to see a neurologist there.
Right.
Most of them are set up for just primary care kind of issues. And if there's something more significant, they'll refer you to somebody else outside the health center. But if you're trying to find a doctor in your area and you don't really know much about the area, they could be a good resource to recommend people, especially if you're at a big major university that has a medical center. They might be more familiar with the doctors there and who might be a good match for you.
Monique, as Dr. Pargeon said about going to HR and asking about resources and options, insurance options, in your personal journey, what are some of the resources that you've sought out, or maybe how have you navigated telling people in new spaces about your diagnosis?
Yeah, I'm very open and honest, especially living in Atlanta where you don't have public transportation. So the first thing I'm always saying is I don't drive, and that opens up the conversation. And so then I'm like, yeah, I have epilepsy. And that's kind of how we get on that topic. And so really, especially in college, befriending a friend that you might, get close to if you have more than like one class, you get comfortable, you talk to them about it. In case of an emergency, this is what you do. And then also what I also help my college also had a counseling slash like therapist for college students for free. And if I felt overwhelmed or if I just needed someone to talk to, I could go whenever she had an open slot and really sought out talking to my therapist once a week and just to get things off my chest. Again, I have an incredible husband. And so coming home to him, I have a 8-year old, just turned 8-year old as well. So having an amazing support system, your family, and I understand some college students are away from family, but befriending those friends that you have the same major, because I think you're going to be with these people for 4 years, maybe longer. And having a friend group that's supportive, going to those resources on campus like therapy. You might even find a professor who might be interested in the things that you're interested in, and going to them sometimes was a good way of talking to them about something, even if it was a class you were struggling in or something like that, because your epilepsy, your memory's not the best. And
Yeah.
so I really found just having a good friend group, participating on campus, having those resources. Um, and again, if you don't have family at home, just that's really the best advice that I could give.
Yeah. I'm curious, as you mentioned professors and reaching out, and I'm curious as far as professors needing to be informed. Do you guys ever feel like that's how would you approach that conversation? And also, as far as accommodations go at school, I know the Center for Accommodations at a lot of schools um, can offer help with tests and different things. And I'm curious, what accommodations are you entitled to? Can either of you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is the number one thing you are entitled to, an ADA, is getting accommodations. So now, let me be clear, and this is something I learned the hard way because I didn't have an IEP or a 504 plan in high school, though I should have. It's not the same thing. So, you might get particular accommodations in high school where it's like you can, I don't know, this is just an excuse. Like an elementary student can chew gum, but in high, I know that's like a crazy an example, but they might allow more flexibility around your accommodations. And in college, you have to have a reasonable accommodation. And sometimes it was hard because you would think you're entitled to something and you're not. And I struggled with that. So some examples of a reasonable accommodation for me, I wrote it down. I got alternative testing. So I took my test in the accommodation center. I had longer times on my test, so I think I got double time. Breaks as needed because those tests were long. So I did like 4 hours for a test, so I would need a break. A formula or a word bank, if you have like essay type exam, Scantronics alternative. And then you're also allowed to have like PowerPoints ahead of time, notes ahead of time, and then flexible deadlines. So if you're having a seizure, you may not be able to go to school the next day. I also took that time too, where if I may not have had a seizure, but if I was feeling really tired and I just couldn't, the week was just a lot, I would use that accommodation so that I would refuel for the next week and then get back on track. So those are just some of the accommodations I had. I would go in the beginning of the semester. So you always go to your accommodations or disability office and you tell them, I have epilepsy, and my medicine messes with my memory. What can we do? And they go through and say, okay, this is what we can do. And then I would always set up a meeting with my professors about a week or two before the semester started, whether that was over Zoom or Teams or even met in their office. And that way they got to know me. And then they were like, oh, okay, Monique, yeah, nice to meet you. These are my accommodations. Some professors were nice and were cool about it. Some were like, I don't know about that, the word bank, because that doesn't align with my syllabus. And you would be like, okay, well, how can we overcome this? Because my memory sucks. My medicine, it sucks. And you have to really advocate for yourself. And so for me, I would have to make compromises and say, okay, well, I can't use notes, but how about an index card with like just a few of the vocab words to kind of like help me jog the memory. And so that was really what I would do with with my accommodation. So just to make it
Yeah.
clear, reasonable versus not reasonable
Okay.
is the biggest misconception as well. Yeah.
So just to add to that, so the Americans with Disabilities Act, you're entitled to, as Monique said, reasonable accommodations if the organization is able to give those accommodations. So sometimes smaller organizations are less able to accommodate than bigger organizations, but for college students specifically, as Monique was saying, the biggest ones that I think are very important to advocate for are extensions in test taking time. So some of my patients needed, either double the time or even, an all day to complete whatever the exam was. And then it's really important, I think, to make sure deadlines are flexible. Even as Monique was saying, even if you don't have a seizure, sometimes you can have a lot of auras or something like that, which we know are mini seizures, and that can really make you foggy and you may not turn in your best work. So those are things that are really important. Most of the time, what would happen with students is they'd go to the Office of Disabilities or Accommodations. They'd get paperwork for me to complete as their doctor, or I would send a letter to that organization. You actually don't have to disclose what your diagnosis is. There's no requirement for that. I would say some people find that to be easier to disclose their diagnosis because if you have a seizure in the middle of class or if you have a seizure in the dorm or something, it's good for people to be aware. Mm-hmm. And I've advocated for, Monique had said something earlier about educating people around you. I think that's super important. People fear things less when they understand them more. And so I always advocate, let's say you're meeting your freshman dorm mate, you've never met this person before. It's important to tell that person for sure, hey, I have epilepsy. If something happens, here's first aid for epilepsy. Don't stick anything in my mouth. Don't try to pry my jaw open. Make sure the area is clear. And this is my rescue medicine that I take, and this is how to give it. So that person is aware, because you're going to spend a lot of time with that person, whether you like that person or not. You're going to see a lot of them. And if you have a close friend group, same thing. I think it's good to make sure those folks are aware of what's going on. In terms of job accommodations, it's similar. To give you an example, I had a woman who was a radiology tech, and she did shift work. So she would sometimes have a shift during the day, and then 2 days later have an overnight shift. And then, the next day she'd have a day shift. So her schedule was all over the place, and it was affecting her sleep. It was causing breakthrough seizures because sleep was a big trigger for her. And so I wrote a letter to her, her boss at the hospital and said, this person needs a consistent work schedule. They need breaks every, 4 hours. And she was able to switch her schedule to being consistently always during a day shift. And her breakthrough seizures stopped.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that was one of the first things that I thought of when you set the deadlines for accommodations, because I think I'm a student myself right now, and even just culture within the college, like this lack of sleep is very kind of glorified within conversation of like, I stayed up all night finishing this paper, and it's like, okay, maybe I would say be aware that like it's completely okay if you need to have those accommodations and the deadlines, and if you cannot pull an unnecessary all-nighter in the dorm, because luckily you have your accommodations and hopefully can have access to that. Stuff like that. I mean, I think sleep's a trigger for a lot of people, and also just your overall health. It's not really healthy for any college student, but I will say I think that I could see being a huge one to really fight for and understand that it's not embarrassing to ask for that, for sure. Professors can understand,
Oh, and Monique mentioned some professor giving her a hard time. They actually don't have a choice.
Yep.
This is a federal law. So you have, if the university is granting you the accommodations, or the college is granting the accommodations, the professor has to do that. There's not, they can say, well, I don't think this isn't fair. I don't think I should have to do it. Well, it's federal law.
Not up to them. Yep.
Yeah.
And I would also like to say, like, oh gosh, I forgot what I was going to say. with your scheduling, especially in college, if you know you're not a morning person, take the afternoon classes. If you are a morning person, take, with your scheduling, your schedule for your classes does make a difference. You don't want to be falling asleep in a morning class, or if you lack of sleep, because you are a night owl, can cause a seizure. So definitely, sort out your schedule the way that you think you might work. And another thing also I didn't mention, priority seating was an accommodation. So whether you want to be in the front or if you want to be in the back, I like the middle, kind of just in the middle, but that's also something that people can get as priority seating if you want to sit close and take notes, or if you want to be in the back and hidden.
I really briefly want to mention that you both talked about how to tell other people, and Dr. Pargeon, especially like with telling new roommates and stuff. We do, not to plug our resources on the website, but if anyone wants a little bit more of a guide, we do have a handout on the KarenBoyceFoundation.org that is all about talking to like your new friends and roommates about your epilepsy and giving them sort of the resources that they may need, which might be helpful if you don't really know someone and you want like a kind of a handout to be able to guide you and give that conversation some help. I would encourage anyone to check that out.
And obviously with new schools, new jobs, there's going to be spontaneous social situations where maybe you're at the last second, you're invited to a happy hour, or maybe you're going to meet some people that you haven't met before. Medical ID bracelets. I feel like those, you can never go wrong with those.
Yep. And they're not as ugly as they used to be. Just make sure they actually look like a medical alert bracelet, not just jewelry. So I've had to caution people about that, but I think that's really important. Make sure you write what your diagnosis is, any allergies to medications, and your emergency contact. I used to practice in New York City, so a lot of my patients who would have a seizure on the subway, people would think they were on drugs. And this was a great way for a healthcare provider or anybody just to say, oh, the person has seizures. This isn't the person's not using some substance. They're actually having a seizure, and how the first aid would change a little bit once they had that information on the bracelet.
Yeah. Briefly too, I know we touched on with college that you are entitled to these accommodations and that it's federal law. But I also think with the American Disabilities Act, I know even just in our experience with Cameron, there was a lot of nerves about talking to his employer about epilepsy, just like being afraid that he would be treated different at work. And I think that's something that a lot of people go through. And I'm curious, just any advice you have on that, but also a reminder to people that it is illegal to discriminate against you because of it. So yeah.
It is, but I will say I've had some patients still have it happen in kind of a sneaky sort of way. I had one patient when I was at Hopkins that was a social worker, and his job was to go visit, patients, clients, I guess, not patients, but clients in their homes, in their environment, and he couldn't drive. And he was in the Washington, D.C. area. And public transportation's okay, but it's not amazing, and it's not good enough to just take that like it would be in New York City. And so we got him in a reasonable accommodation and to do a desk job, which wasn't his ideal, but it was still employment. And then they eliminated the desk job. So I was a little unhappy with that because they found their way around it. They're like, oh, well, we've decided to do away with this position. We're not discriminating against you because you have epilepsy. We just got rid of this position. And I felt really false. This wasn't right. This was sort of their roundabout plot to get rid of somebody that they didn't feel like could do the job that he was doing before.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why people are so afraid to talk about it, is even though it's illegal, like there are these back ways that people will still continue to discriminate. And I think that how do either of you have advice on balancing sort of protecting yourself and also informing your employer so you get what you need? Is that just like a constant thing you have to work on and measure, or?
I mean, Monique was saying she's very open about it. I usually tell people you have to tell, and I wouldn't necessarily tell everyone since people do still discriminate. against people with disabilities. They have this idea that you're not able or not capable of doing the same job that other people are. And obviously that's not the case. But it is important. If you have a seizure at work, everyone's going to figure that out. So it might be good for at least the people that you immediately work with, that you are comfortable with, maybe making sure they are familiar with seizure first aid. And HR obviously is a big area. Your direct supervisor, again, does not have to know what your diagnosis is.
Yeah.
It could be anything. But I think with HR, it would be important to have some ally there that can kind of help you navigate your particular job, especially if we have to make reasonable accommodations at that job for you.
No, that's really good advice. Like maybe the middle ground is something along the lines of finding an ally at HR or even your direct peers who aren't necessarily the ones hiring you or not, as a way, not that anyone should feel ashamed, but we want to be understanding of the fact that people are nervous, that they'll be discriminated against in that sort of situation. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah, and if you're a little bit nervous about telling people, or you're newly diagnosed and you're unsure of how to present it to people, it seems like the rule of thumb is like safety first. Like make sure you're safe, and then kind of figure out, socially how comfortable you feel. And maybe you'll find yourself on the Monique end of the spectrum and be really comfortable with letting people know, because you maybe are around a loving group of people who are accepting. Or maybe you want to take your time to like ease into it.
Yeah, it definitely was easing into. Like I said, I'm open to the people that are supposed to be open. I don't just go randomly saying, "Hey, I have epilepsy." No, it was, more so like I start seeing the same people over and over, especially in college and even in the workplace, because I did work at a hospital. So just that the nurses that I worked with knew, and they know what to do. So it was just a little bit more comfortable to tell them like, "Hey, by the way, you don't have to call an ambulance or anything, I have epilepsy. My husband is my contact person." So, yeah, it wasn't just, you kind of can ease into it as well. You don't have to.
Absolutely.
One important thing that you guys brought up too is alcohol. So alcohol and, going off to college, believe it or not, I've had a lot of conversations with students. We kick mom or dad out of the room and then chat about it. But they're like, I want to be a normal college student. I go out to a party. My friends are all drinking. What am I supposed to do? If I don't drink, then I look weird or I look strange. And, the realist in me always has to tell them, well, if you drink too much, that could be a trigger, and you could have a seizure with that, but 1 or 2 drinks here or there probably isn't gonna kill you.
Yeah.
So I think moderation is usually the key, and maybe not staying up all night at the keg party and then hoping that you won't have a consequence the next day.
Yeah. Like I think if you're gonna drink, but sleep's like, make sure you go to bed. But like you said, moderation. I also will speak as a friend. One of our friends who has epilepsy. One of the things that I remember I asked him once, and this was kind of in an age where we were going out a lot as a friend group. And I was like, hey, is it okay with you if every once in a while when we're out, if I check in to just remind you, make sure you took your medication? And he was like, yeah, I would actually really appreciate that. And I asked him outside of it because I didn't want him to feel like I was momming him when we were on nights out. But as a friend, I know it made me feel better. And I think it made him feel better that he had someone that was also like looking out for him in that situation. I think going out with someone that knows your condition is going to be really helpful, just because if something happens, you have someone who's informed with you and someone who can be like, drink a glass of water, and it's not momming you, but maybe if you can sort of hopefully have a friend to establish that kind of relationship, or if you are a friend listening and you're wanting to assist your friend, I think have that conversation outside of the night out so that you guys just kind of set these sort of, I don't want to say rules, but like they know that it's well-meaning and it's not meant to mom them.
And I feel like one person makes the world of difference. It's something as simple as, if one person knows, it's like, oh, I'm going to use a bathroom, they'll go, oh, you know what? Actually, I have to use a bathroom too. Instead of, you can still take care of yourself and also still feel without feeling othered in the social setting.
Yeah, I actually had a friend. She saw me have an aura in math class, and she was on the other side of the room, and she saw it happening, and so from then on, she moved her seat next to me, and in math class, she would just kind of like look over, and I'm like, I'm good.
Yeah.
But she moved across the room just so that she could be there in case of an emergency. And I loved her for that. And also, on the alcohols, I had a friend who would say, like, no one has to know what's in your cup. So, I have a Sprite, I have a Coke all the time. They don't know that it's not non-alcoholic. I'll get the mock version. They don't have
So
to know.
true.
Yeah.
So true. I'm a lightweight, and people always want to take like shots, and I love a water shot because you want to be in on the party, but I'm not way, nobody's paying attention. Usually I'm not advocating for lying to look cool, but I get the feeling of wanting to be involved. Like have the energy. So much of drinking, I think, in college is about the social energy. And there are, there's sometimes I'm just going to say a little white lie in regards to whether or not you're drinking is okay if you don't want people to ask a million questions about why you're not drinking.
Yeah. And sometimes it's nice to have the equivalent of a wingman or a wingwoman who can get you out of maybe an uncomfortable conversation or help like, oh, hey, like maybe this person's being like, my friend's being grilled a little bit as to why they're not drinking. Like, let me help divert the conversation and smooth it over. An ally can, I'm sure, go very far.
Definitely. One thing you kind of brought up was, making sure someone's taken their medications. One thing I often will tell students or young adults, they have these little small pill containers that can attach to a keychain that don't really look like, they just look like a keychain. It's always good just to have extra of your medication with you. If you're out somewhere and you aren't going to be home for a while, it'd be good just to take your medicine while you're out. And just making sure that you have some way to carry it. The other thing I also like to talk to younger folks about is making sure you have a pill reminder. So sometimes, like when you're at home, your mom is like, hey, did you take your medicine? Oh, yeah, there you go. Well, mom's not going to come with you as a pill reminder when you go to college or, go for your first job. So there are a lot of great apps that can help with that. If you want to do like old school, I guess you could fill up a pill box, but most younger people aren't going to do that. But I think the apps are good because they'll remind you, and some of them won't turn off until you log into the phone and actually check mark it.
That's super smart.
Yeah.
I think if you have one that's just easy to ignore, like, no, not going to do that right now. It's easier to brush it off, but I think just making sure you have some way to help you remember to take your medicine.
I'm the person who takes, like, I have a pill that I have to take on time, and I will take it, and then 2 minutes later, I forget if I've taken it or not. So I got these little, and because I'm lazy with pill boxes, they're so inexpensive on Amazon. They're like timer caps. So it shows, it goes on a pill bottle, and it shows you what time you opened the bottle last. So if you forget, like if you're like, did I take it? You can check and see if you just opened it or if it's been 24 hours and you need to actually take it. So that they're really inexpensive on Amazon too, if that is helpful to anyone.
That is definitely going to be helpful because I will do that. I'm like, did I take my medicine? And then I don't. And I've done it where I've actually doubled my medicine. I'm like, I think I took 2.
Yeah, you're like, I definitely took it before.
No, it's so helpful. I got one for my friend too, and she texts me all the time. She's like, that saved me because I forget constantly.
I also always carry my anxiety meds and my keys with me. I have like the little pill holder. And at first, when I was first putting it on, I'm like, oh, this is going to stick out kind of like a sore thumb. I feel like everyone's going to notice. In the 5 years I've had it, not a single person has ever commented on it. It has never come up.
Yeah. You had to tell me you had it. I didn't know. I'm with you all the time. So
yeah. Clearly. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. It feels like there's a tremendous amount of resources that are out there and new ones coming out every single day. But it's important to stay curious and engaged, not only with your healthcare provider, but also with the environments that you're in.
Yeah, you guys, I feel like we could talk about this for so long. There's clearly so many things. As we're wrapping up on an unofficial note, Is there anything that anyone feels like they need to share, like they wanted to? I know Monique, we had talked. I know you talked a bit about Heather about like your experience in college. Do you feel like you got everything and that you wanted to talk about and share here?
Yeah, I think I'll just leave on one note, just that really I cut PSA of I wish professors and even the accommodations counselors would have a little bit more of a safety seizure
Mm.
training like they do in schools. I know we just passed the AJ law down here in Atlanta, or in Georgia rather, with teachers and nurses having to know, like if someone has a seizure safety plan on their 504 or IEP, they have to like learn seizure safety. Seizure safety. But they don't have that training. A lot of times they don't have that training in college. And I had an experience the semester before I graduated, or the right before I graduated, where I got accused of cheating because I had a focal seizure, where your brain is, the way I can best describe it, your brain is doing one thing and your body's doing another. And I'm
Mhm.
texting on the phone my husband that I'm about to have a seizure while taking a test. And yet it looked like I was cheating because it looked like I was texting on a
Mm.
test. And it was, wow, it went totally left. And I guess at the end of the day, not having your phone in the classroom, if it's not at your accommodation. So that's a lesson learned, that I had to learn. Like it wasn't an unofficial accommodation to have your phone. I eventually got that as a accommodation afterwards, but it was a whole thing. And so I really just want to put out there, like, having the professors, having accommodations counselors, having that training, because and they would have known me, and I was at this college for 2.5 years, and they knew me. I've never cheated. I've always did everything. I would put everything in my locker, did everything correctly, and that day I was just off. And I wish they would have kind of saw, like, she's not really acting the same. And so if they would have known or just kind of had an inkling, they would have been like, okay, something's off. We need to like talk to her, pull her aside, instead of just going straight to cheating on a test. And it worked out, but it was still very traumatizing, because I had a seizure during the ACT. So it took me right back to
Mm.
that to that timeline again. And I'm like, oh my gosh, school is not meant for me. But I ended up graduating, so everything was fine. But just, really advocating for yourself, having that safety seizure plan on file, and really raising awareness and advocating for yourself.
So you bring up a really good point. I think it's important for them to know, what do your seizures look like? Everyone has this conception that seizures are whole body shaking seizures or generalized tonic-clonic seizures. That isn't how everyone's seizures look. Some seizures look, you're just staring and smacking your lips, picking at things. Some people during a focal seizure can get up and walk around and do things that are not in their character, or do something that's more of an automatic behavior. People can have drop attacks. People can have just staring for a few seconds and they pick right back up with whatever they were doing before. Some people have jerks. There's all kinds of things, but making sure that they're aware, this is what my seizures look like. If I have something like this in class, then that's important for you guys to be aware of that. I wish seizure safety was more widely discussed. It's part of what one of our mandates is, get people educated and make sure people understand. Epilepsy isn't this thing from the 1500s where someone has like a evil spirit inside of them. This is a medical condition. They can't control what's happening, and it's important for all of us to support people around you. So I just think the big thing, a lot of it's just planning ahead and making sure that you try to anticipate problems as much as you can before they happen.
Yeah, I really appreciate both of your input on that. I think it goes back to just that this is a challenging thing and that raising the awareness, and for people like Monique who are so comfortable and open, that goes a long way for so many people. So thank you both for doing this, because I hope that someone's listening and will feel a little more confidence in telling their professor or going to their accommodation center or anything like that. But it's hard. People do have such misconceptions about seizures still. And like you said, hopefully the more we can talk about it, some compassion can also be understood for Is things like test taking, sure, yes, rules. Some people are maliciously cheating, but to think twice and really try to understand, and especially when they know you, that is heartbreaking to hear, honestly. So thank you for sharing it, though. And Dr. Pargeon, I think that's a great response and great thought to it.
Once again, thank you both for joining us today. And thank you, UCB, for sponsoring us and making this podcast happen. If you enjoyed what you heard and you're looking for some more resources, check out thecameronboycefoundation.org. And also follow us on Instagram if you want to join the conversation, and check us out on Facebook if you want to join a support group and, see some peers and talk to some peers. Thank you for joining us. And check back in for the next episode.